look so far away. I need to do this review. What's that spell again? Oh, that's right. Expelliarmus! Wait, no! Rock spell! Hey everyone, and welcome to the second part of my two-part series on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. If you haven't checked out part 1, I suggest go checking that out, though you don't have to if you don't want. So, anyways, in this part I will be discussing the world building, the actual writing of Harry Potter, and I will touch on the themes, and I will go briefly over how I overall think of this book. So, without further ado, let's get started. So in terms of the world building, I don't really have too much to say. My thoughts are pretty much the same as the first, with none of my questions about the world really being answered, though the world was expanded. In terms of world building overall, she didn't really answer any of the major questions that I had of the world when the first book ended. So what exactly did she expand on? Well, most of it was, quite frankly, the magic system and a little bit more about the Wizarding Society as a whole. First with the magic system, since that was the biggest thing that was expanded upon in this book. Okay, granted, we didn't really learn too much about it, which is why the fact that there is such a lack of rules kind of frustrates me. We did, of course, learn about a few more magical creatures, and when I mean a few more, I mean like the spiders, the snake, this thing, and also the phoenix, which are really cool. And I really do, find the magical creatures like kind of cool and interesting. And we got to learn a little bit more about magical creatures, which is pretty fun. Nothing really mind-blowing. The only thing that we really got was the diary, and that was really, in my opinion, the biggest kind of new magic thing that we learned. That was the most different from the other things. I'm gonna just talk about the diary because I actually really like this diary. I really like the concept of it. I find it very fascinating, the fact that it's like Voldemort's, aka Tom Riddle's, consciousness from like when he was like 16, implanted in this diary, and he's like able to like possess and like manipulate, and like I don't 100% understand it, and maybe that's why I'm so intrigued with it, because I don't know everything about it. And the fact that like when it possesses, like somehow like his like magical essence has to be because only the descendant of the true heir of Slytherin can open the chamber, and he was the heir of Slytherin, and obviously Ginny wasn't, so somehow that magical essence had been like transformed, so almost as a way of possession, but not exactly. And it's interesting in how exactly it works. Like it goes through the page, because at the end when he stabs the diary, like all the ink comes out, so like the ink is like stored within it, and it's just it's so cool. And the fact that it can take you into the person's consciousness, and like it's Voldemort, but it's not Voldemort because it's really just Tom Riddle. Like spell isn't acted, it's like that person's consciousness at that point. But at the same time, like he knew about the future, but is that because of what people wrote in it, or like what? Like I don't know. And it's fascinating, and even though not everything was explained or anything, I don't really have a problem with it, because in all honesty, not everything needs to be explained, and that air of mystery, I think, sometimes makes it more fascinating. I don't think we're actually going to continue with, it being further explored on how it works or whatever, but it's kind of fun to, think of and almost theorize of exactly how it works, because all of the answers weren't there, which I think is why so many people like the world, because even though it's explained, it's not explained, and I think that's room for you to fill it in with your own imagination. Overall, I actually like the world building a lot. However, there was one part of the world that I was like, okay, how, and that is with the mud blood slash squibs aspect. So this part was sort of brought up in the first book, the fact that, you know, Hermione was, you know, had two non-wizarding parents and Jeremy, and I think the idea of like mudbloods, half-bloods, and squibs, it's, you know, kind of interesting, and it does make sense, and it was sort of set up in the first book, so I didn't really have a problem with it. However, I have questions on it, of course. One of my main questions is, did no one tell Hermione, like, has no one ever called her a mudblood before? Like, here's the thing, it's how they use the word mudblood is very, interesting. So it's kind of, so when we first hear it, it's kind of used as, like, a racial slur, and it was so bad, he got really mad, he accidentally cursed himself, and everyone's so appalled by that, but, like, they use it a few other times in the book, and it's like less severe, and I don't really even question, you know, why it's used the way it is, but I have more of a question on, really, Hermione has never heard this before? Like, I can understand maybe Harry never hearing this before, because he's not a mudblood, but the fact that Hermione never hears it, and we know she's never heard this before, because when Draco first calls her that, she's like, what are you even talking about? Like, what the heck is this? And I'm like, really? Really? No one has ever said this before, because they do use it a few other times in the book, and a lot more casually than, you know, that first time that it's used. But, like, never heard that. No one has ever called her that before, including Draco. To this point, he just never did it, he just never said it before. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand how she wouldn't know that. Maybe she has heard it and she just never thought of it twice, but that was strange to me. And I don't understand that, and I know why this was never used, because clearly this wasn't thought up before this book. Obviously the concept was, but the actual, you know, the word and the meanings behind it clearly wasn't thought up until this book, because there's no reason why it shouldn't have been used in the first book. And I guess the same thing with sort of the squib. This was sort of like a new kind of concept, and the problem I have with it using, not the fact that it's a thing, but more of a problem that Flitch, who's the only squib that we see in this entire book series so far, we didn't really get any hints that he was one, that he was a squib in the first book. I mean, never directly used magic, but, like, it wasn't really addressed. Like, it never said, like, he can't use magic. Like, he just never really did. And I guess that, you know, it felt almost sort of like an after thought. I don't know, it was kind of weird. Though I do like that I talked about this in the characters, though I do like that he is one, I feel like that wasn't thought of up well, nor was that really set up well, but then again, his entire character wasn't set up well, so the other question I have on with all that is the Half-Bloods. So I feel like this is going to be further explored and more what Half-Bloods mean, especially since one of the books is called The Half-Blood Prince, so I don't think I have to worry too much about that, but right now, it's not, and it's weird, and I don't like it. So, okay, moving on to the actual writing. What did I think of it overall? Well, I mean, it was definitely way better than the first book. I honestly believe, you know, that your first book is always your worst, and I still hold by that. This book was way better, at least written-wise. There were less lines and moments in the story that really took me out. Though I do still have a problem with the first chapter. I'm not gonna lie, in the beginning, there were a few moments, like on page 3, where it goes into this giant, ramble about basically everything we learned about the world and Harry from the first book, which is, quite annoying. And that took me out of the story, and I'm just like, no, I just read this. Don't make me do this. Like, I already know. I read the first book, and that really bothered me. And no, I hate whenever that's done in books, just in general. Yeah, they do that also with, like, Voldemort. They go through Voldemort again, like, they haven't explained Voldemort to me 1,000 times. That was just one of the things. There were a few other just kind of weird lines in the book, that I just didn't like. But there were a lot less cringy lines, and as I said, there was less telling and more showing in the book for the most part. I wouldn't exactly say there were a lot of scenes in this book. I felt like there were more summary, which is okay. I guess that's just sort of her style, but she did something really weird in this book that I don't remember if she did in the last book. If she did, it didn't stick out to me as much. Maybe because I just did not like her writing in general in the first book, and I still don't like it. I don't really like her style, in my opinion. I don't like her style, but it was better. Again, maybe because I'm more used to it, or maybe because it was just better in this book. But she did do this one weird thing, and I have never seen this in books before, like any book I've read up to this point, at least none that I can remember that have done this sort of thing. And she does this repeatedly. So she does like two things with these parentheses. So she'd either use this, so she did these things with parentheses, and I don't hate parentheses, though I used to use these a lot too in my writing, but then I sort of stopped because my writing partner hates them, so I don't use them as much anymore. But she uses them quite a bit, not like a ton where it's like every page or so, but like she usually does it like once a chapter, especially in the later half of the book, when, as I said, the actual plot really gets rolling. But she does this two ways, and I'll give you an example of each. So on page 142, it's the scene where Mrs. Norris was petrified, and they're checking her out, and so on page 142, and it says, "Not dead," choked Finch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. "But why, she's all stiff and frozen." "She's been petrified," said Dumbledore. Parentheses, "Ah, I thought so," said Lockhart. End of parentheses, period. "But how, I cannot say." This is a weird style choice, which is weird. She does this a few other times, and if you look at it, it's just really weird, because it's just could be so much smoother. You could just have it, said Dumbledore, period, enter, "Ah, I thought so," said Lockhart, period, but how, I cannot say, and then enter, but how, I cannot say, bam, so much simple, and it just looks better, in my opinion, how that is. But again, that's just a weird style choice, but I don't understand the point of putting those parentheses there, especially because it's just said Lockhart, because, like, you're just saying said, so you could have just used, like, a different tag, and I have no problem with people saying said, but, like, you could have just used, like, oh, like, explained or, like, interrupted or whatever. Like, you could have just used something else to kind of indicate that he was interrupting Dumbledore, because it still, like, splits it up, and it splits up this text really weird, and I just don't like it. But that's a personal style choice. Like, it's not a big deal, but I just didn't like it. And she does this, though. This is so much more infuriating, because so she also does it where, like, there would be, and then, like, a paragraph, like a summary, and then there would be this one line that's a quote, and she would put it in parentheses, and it just looked weird, and it wasn't transitioned to like a scene or anything like that, because then it would just continue on with the paraphrasing, and I just don't understand. Like, you don't need that in there. Why did you put that in there? I'll give you an example. Okay, so in the last chapter, she did this on page 340. She does it. So it starts off like this. The rest of the final term passed in a haze of blazing sunshine. Hogwarts was back to normal, with only a few small differences. Defense against the dark arts classes were cancelled, but we've had plenty of practice anyway, Ron told a disgruntled Hermione. And Lucas Malfoy had been sacked as the school governor. So, as you can see, it just breaks up the flow, and it's really weird how it is, and I don't like it. I would just honestly cut that out, and I guess that's what sort of the brackets are for, but it just feels, useless and pointless. That's what's just, I don't like it, and that happened, and it was weird. So overall, the writing was better, though there were some things obviously that still bothered, and it was kind of, I guess, more nitpicking, and these are obviously more style choices. Obviously there's nothing like majorly wrong with it. I just personally don't really like it, and I think it feels clunky and, almost amateurish. The weird thing is, I used to do a lot of these things too, but then I became a better writer, so I don't do them anymore. But yeah, I used to do that, and then my style really started changing and setting in, and I don't do these things anymore because they're terrible. But yeah, I don't really like, I don't like how she writes. I don't like how she writes things, and I think that's why I'm not, honestly, overall, a big of a fan of this Harry Potter series. And it's not because of the characters or the world building or the plot, but I really honestly believe that it's this writing that always turns me off to these books, and why they're just so much harder to get through, and also because of other problems. Like I said, like the plot's slow, the first few chapters are usually really slow, and overall they're just less enjoyable. So really quickly, I want to discuss the themes of this book, or the supposed themes of this book. So I have heard from multiple reviewers, actually surprisingly when they're usually talking about other books, as well as, like a few friends and everything, that a major theme in these books is like racism and everything. And obviously there's like a lot of kind of like coding in this, and it's not exactly, and I don't think it's not done well, but I find the message very odd, because it clearly has, an anti-racism message in this book, and that's pretty clear. And I didn't talk about this in the first book. Apparently this is a very much serious thing, and even just judging by some of the titles of the other books, I know this is going to come up more. But I think it was really first introduced in this book, because I don't think the first book really introduced this theme. Obviously there were themes in the first book, but not like, the theme in this book. Because here's where I think that theme was introduced, and I didn't talk about the themes in the first book, because I didn't think they were important. I didn't think they were necessary, and honestly, I couldn't find, any real critiques on the themes, or really any themes that really stuck out to me as, either a good or a bad thing. But this one, it really stood out to me, and the themes were more obvious in this book, I feel. And there is a lot of hypocrisy in this book. In one sense, they're saying that, racism is bad, basically. Basically, like, you shouldn't treat mudbloods or muggles worse than wizards, because wizards aren't superior, and everything. But they also have this really weird thing. All the characters are saying, like, oh yeah, like, like, I believe this, and, like, or whatever, like, this is bad, and, wrong. Even the term mudblood definitely has some meaning to it, and half-blood, and pure blood. Those clearly have meanings, and obviously racial meanings behind it. It's not that I didn't like, or that I don't think that you should talk about these themes and things in book series, and not even that she didn't do it well. This book shows a lot of hypocrisy with its own themes, and a lot of things that contradicts its own themes. Maybe this was intentional, maybe not, but I just wanted to point it out. Because in this book, two things that really stood out about it. So, the whole mud blood thing. Yeah. Okay, so mudbloods, but at the same time, so, you know, obviously, and everything, and the book does do a pretty good job, I think mostly since Hermione is one of the main characters, of basically showing mudbloods, as just as capable as pure-blooded wizards. But at the same time, it also contradicts itself with characters like Justin and Cleary, who are also mudbloods, but are seen as lesser as, or inferior as, or are more annoying, which wouldn't be a problem, which I didn't find too much of a problem, because you do have Hermione, but then how they treat Hermione's parents in this book, and how they treat muggles in this book, and I find it kind of annoying, because all the muggles we see so far in the entire Harry Potter series, up to this point, all of the muggles we see are either A, non-relevant, non-existent, such as Hermione's parents, who show up, they don't speak, they don't say anything, we don't know anything about them, they're not really characters. And then the Dooleys, who are seen as evil, hatred people, who are seen as stupid and dumb, uneducated, fat, even, ugly, and how they're described and everything. And obviously this is in Harry's point of view, and not saying that the Dooleys aren't these terrible people, because they clearly are. And I guess you can argue in a weird way it shows their prejudices. But, then you see how even Ron's parents treat like muggles, and how they react to muggles, not so much mudbloods as muggles, like they're these mystical creatures, and multiple times they paint muggles as very stupid, and they paint a lot of mudbloods as very stupid, with again the exception of Hermione, and I guess arguably the person in Ravenclaw, but we know nothing about her, who's apparently a mudblood, but again, we know nothing about this chick, and so obvious and everything, we just know she's in Ravenclaw, so I guess she's smart, but we don't really know anything about her. And then of course Hermione, and which she, I guess, is sort of the counterbalance, but even then it's very odd. And then also, squibs, we only know one squib, and again in the first book, and I would argue that in this book she does show more humanity towards Flitch, but he's been painted as such this terrible person, and this awful human being, and then the way the entire book treats Slytherin, and I know, Slytherin, they're a house, and it's a little bit different, it's based on personality, but again, this sort of group sort of feeling, and this hatred towards all Slytherins. I get it, the Dark Lord was a Slytherin, I get it, there's been a lot of Dark Lords Slytherin, but you would think, just the way they're all described, the fact that Harry Potter is so horrified to even being considered, you know, a Slytherin, and like these Slytherin are these evil, you know, people and group. And I know it's fiction and it's a house, but not only that, but the way they're described, a lot of like pointed features, pale or really fat. Again, surprisingly, very similar to also how the Dooleys are described. And while there's nothing really, I suppose, intentionally wrong with that, it is a pretty key thing that all of the bad characters are also described as very ugly, or all the ugly characters are described as bad, with maybe the exception of Hagrid, who isn't described, you know, as a particularly beautiful person, but he's more described as like a friendly giant sort of scenario. And I get this is what they're going for, but every single Slytherin we see is this terrible. Like, all of these people are awful, and the fact in all of the Slytherins we know are just these terrible, terrible people. And remember, Slytherins are described as passionate, not evil, not greedy, not power hungry, but passionate. And in a weird way, it's like she's saying that all passionate people are evil is terrible thing to say. And again, the fact that Harry's so appalled by being called a Slytherin, and is so afraid of that, it's terrible. And obviously, you know, all the Slytherins we see are terrible people. They want to kill all these people, but again, like, are all these Slytherin just really these terrible people? And if Slytherins always turn out all these bad people, why is it still a Hogwarts house? Like, why would you do that? So overall, my thoughts on this book, I am not gonna lie, I like this book better than the first book. As I said, this book was harder to get through, especially those first few chapters. But after you get through those first few chapters, the book is really entertaining. I thought it was more coherent. I thought the plot was better. I personally believe the characters were worse. The world building was a little worse, but you know, I can't really say much. The writing is way better and way more enjoyable. And overall, I think overall I would give this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think it's a little bit better than the first book, but overall, it still wasn't an amazing book for me. So, that's all for this video. If you like it, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel to see more. I will be posting videos every other Tuesday. My writing partner Grace and I have a website and a blog, so you can go check that out in the link below. Also, you can look us up at Facebook at Carmen.Thompson, and I'll see you in the next video.